We continue looking at the Intra-Africa Trade Fair, serving as a unique platform to facilitate business and boost economies on the continent. Well, the event also providing a platform, as you heard from Minister Patel there, for buyers, sellers and investors to share and market some of their services. We're joined now by the Institute for Security Studies, Dr. Jackie Cilliers. Dr. Cilliers, good evening to you. Thank you so much for your time. So we heard about the ministers talking about what the intention of this trade fair is and what they're hoping to achieve. But let's look practically at some of the challenges that face different countries on the continent and why perhaps even something like the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement is still something whose details are still being worked out, and yet, of course, it was received with a great deal of enthusiasm from different countries.
Kathy, yes, but, you know, the Continental Free Trade Agreement has a long... We've only signed the agreement. We've set up the Secretariat in Ghana, and the agreement will only be in full effect in 2034. There's a long, long road to travel. These things are complicated. They take time. We have to start somewhere. And if Africa does not enter into a free trade agreement, we are 3% of the global economy. And one of the reasons is that we don't offer a large enough market. And by entering the Continental Free Trade Agreement, we open up much larger markets for multinationals to come and invest and to exploit that much larger market. So we're starting small. It's a long road ahead, but it's very important.
And why is it that the market on the continent is seen as being so constrained, given the fact that there certainly is not a shortage of people and potential in as far as buying capital and opportunities are concerned?
You know, Africa remains the most underdeveloped continent globally. We have more than 500 million people living in extreme poverty. We are growing, but we are growing far too slowly. And one of the reasons for the establishment of the Continental Free Trade Agreement is to allow African countries to trade better with one another, open up larger markets. And that is the way in which you build value addition to your products, because the value of inter-Africa trade is much higher in content value than the value of Africa's trade externally with China and Europe and the United States. So the way you build manufacturing capacity and you industrialize is to first trade with one another and go up the value chain and eventually then start becoming members of global value chains. But that's going to take a long time, and we need to get the tariff barriers out of the way. We need to build infrastructure and allow the continent's 1.3 billion people to be able to benefit from finance, from the movement of technology from one country to the other, and also for investors to come and invest everywhere on the continent, because they then have the opportunity to sell everywhere.
Let's talk about what we currently have existing in the form of intra-regional trade amongst different regions of the continent. Do you think that that is at the scale that it could be, and especially when we look at what is happening in the formal economy versus what happens in the informal economy?
Okay, so Africa, only about 15, 16, 17% of Africa's trade is with other African countries. The vast majority of our trade is with China, with Europe, and to a much smaller extent with the United States and other countries. India and so on and so forth is growing. So the first thing that needs to happen is that we need to up the extent to which we trade with one another. As I said, that increases the value content of your trade and allows you to go up the value-added ladder. And of course, there are many problems with this. As you indicate, a large component of Africa's economy is informal. Very often subsistence agriculture and low-end services sector in urban, very often in squatter and informal settlements. All of that needs to change. That is only possible if you grow much more rapidly. There are certain regions. You also asked the question, where is trade happening in Africa? Now, most trade Remember, I said only about 16% of Africa's trade is with other African countries. Most of the intra-country trade is in actual fact in Southern Africa, and the region is because we have the Southern Africa Customs Union. So by expanding our free trade arrangements, we can hopefully also trade much more with the rest of Africa. But if the continent does not integrate from a trade perspective, it will not be able to offer a large enough market for the international community.
What is it going to take to push for greater industrialization, as you're saying, across the continent?
It's going to take leadership. It's the most important political will. There are certain countries, previously until recently, Ethiopia, Rwanda, that are reindustrializing. The problem is that Africa is experiencing what is known as, we are actually deindustrializing from very low levels because we are so commodity dependent. We export base commodities to China and everywhere else. The only region where South Africa, for example, has a competitive advantage on value-added goods is in Southern Africa. Our trade with Europe is slightly more higher value than our trade with China and the US, but that's not good enough. The only way you go up the industrialization ladder is by determined leadership that invests in building that manufacturing capacity and then making it possible for countries to trade with one another. I say again, regional trade has got a higher value-added content than trade with the rest of the world. We export commodities to the rest of the world. We can export low-end manufacturing goods to one another. South Africa, the vehicle manufacturing hub in sub-Saharan Africa, can export vehicles to the rest of Africa. That's high-end goods. So there are many, many things that have to happen, but it's a long and a slow process, and the Continental Free Trade Agreement is a very, very important first step.
Dr. Jackie Cilliers, let me thank you so much for your time tonight. He's with the Institute for Security Studies.